In the last video, we started to generate maps, and here I've started to apply it to our little console/buffet, and I want to show you how to do the same. So what I'm going to do is open my material editor, and you can see our existing material was here. Okay, so that's what we left off with. Now I'm making this material here, and I'm going to replace it there. So let's just make this from scratch. Let me show you the result I'm going for first, and then the result I've gotten so far. So this is basically the result I've been going for, this mid-century modern look with this kind of wood on it, this color wood on it. So I'm studying kind of the sheen, the reflection, and the color of this. You can see there's a little bit of reflection right there, reflecting a window that's off to the left. And on these louvers that are pointed up, you can see some reflection too. But it's not like a sharp mirror-like reflection. It's kind of a nice spread out reflection. So we'll reference this. It's also got some darker edges, which we'll try to recreate at least a little bit. So these have kind of more stain on them and they're darker. Yeah, so those are the things we're mainly going to look at. And I just did this quick render to show what my material is looking like when I render. And this is it right here. You can see this vertical still has the old material on it, which looks kind of funky at this point. But this darker wood here is the material that we're about to create. Applied on the console and rendered. I think it looks pretty nice. You have these nice reflections here. You have a window reflecting here similarly to the picture we were looking at. We're getting nice highlights on these edges here, and you can still see the grain in the wood. So let's take a look at how we created this wood. Okay, first thing I wanted to do was take this material and drag it and copy it. And from here, we're going to take, and the reason we do that is not because the settings of it are necessarily fantastic. We can adjust those how we want, but we're doing that because the maps are set up already mapped onto this furniture here. So now if we just replace the maps with our maps, then it should work. So you can see that this actually isn't using real world scale, and that's okay. We mapped this all with 1:1 tiling, so we can just continue with that. And I've showed in the past that real world scale usually makes it easier, but this one's already mapped with 1:1 tiling, so that's fine as long as it's mapped correctly. And we'll go in and we'll get the maps that we just created, which I'll provide to you in the resources. If we open it up with our new map on there, we see that the diffuse map is now ours, but there's still a reflection of the existing material going on there. Now with this one, we want to look at blur. If you look here, it's kind of sharp and got a lot of noise in it. And so I didn't go with the full 0 blur on this one. I want to go more like 0.3 or so. And we're just leaving that at 1:1 tiling again. Now for the reflections, we can go in and put in our maps. Reflection is here. And you can see that that reflection updated now to match our diffuse, obviously, and then the bump. And you can see with the bump, we're getting a little too much noise going on in here. And so what I wanted to do with this one is maybe turn up the blurring a little bit, maybe even higher. Maybe somewhere like there. And then maybe turn down the map influence a little bit. Maybe something like that. And I'm going strictly off these previews. Now that looks a little rough for the finish that we want on the finished piece of wood. We're going to address that a little bit, get a little more gloss and sheen onto that, but we're going to put another layer of material to do that. One thing you want to do is make sure that we are on, in the BRDF settings, we're on the microfacet GTR. Let's make sure our Fresnel is right. So this is overridden. Well, Fresnel is on, but is unlocked so that we can adjust this how we want. 3.5 would give us a lot more gloss on that. On this underlying material, think of this as the wood before we put a glossy finish over it. Okay, so we're going to kind of put some lacquer on it or something afterwards to give it more of that polished look. So this will have a less defined reflection on it. We could even go a little more glossy on it. Right now it's set to glossiness of 0.6. We could go 0.5. Okay, and have the wood look sort of like that. I think that looks pretty good. So other than that, these settings are all pretty basic. There's nothing very special going on here. It's just using our maps. And you can see one nice thing about this is that the grain is reflecting a little differently depending on what the grain is doing. And that's because of that nice reflection map we made. And then there's a slight amount of bump in there. So it's very subtle, but it's the subtleties that will really help you. Okay, so now I've been talking about this sheen we're going to put on it. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to take this, click on the V-Ray material and then find V-Ray blend material here. And this enables us to layer textures on top of each other. We of course want to keep the old as a submaterial. Now we have the V-Ray blend. So now we can just add materials. And it's funny the way this is laid out because our base material is here and these are layers above it. You would think that the base material would be at the bottom and these layers would go up from there, but that's not really how this works. So this is actually the layer that's going on top of this base material. And what we can do here is go in and create just a very basic V-Ray material. And I want to make it basically black, I think. We might adjust that later. But then with the reflect, we want to put some of that reflective sheen into this wood. So it's sort of reflects with, let's look at our image again. I'll bring that up. Okay, if you look here, it's got this reflection on it that's kind of this warm reflection coming off of that wood. It makes it really shine with that kind of orangish color. Okay, so that's what we want to try and recreate in this reflection here. So let's get this orangey color, turn up the value so that it's reflecting a lot. Okay, let's show the display the background here so that we can see how it's reflecting. So now you can see that's got a lot of sheen to that wood and you're still seeing that kind of spread out reflection highlight below. We don't want this to be a perfect mirror. Let's put it at 8. Okay, that's the kind of thing we're getting. And I actually think I do want to add a little color to the diffuse. So let's take this same reflection color, but now turn it way down. So it's just kind of giving a hint of that. Let's saturate it even more. And again, I'm just going off of this thing here to see what that finished material is going to look like. So now that looks like smooth wood with a nice polished finish on it. By the way, I should mention that I did go back and adjust our diffuse map to be a little bit different color to match that reference image. So what we saw in the last video was a little darker and more brown. I lightened it up and made it a little reddish orange, just using adjustments in Photoshop. So back to where we are. Okay, on this material here, we now have this nice sheen on here, and what I'm going to do is make it so that it has a less perfect finish on it because, well, let's say it has fingerprints or maybe scratches or something like that, or just dust on it. So we're going to make it so the reflection is not perfect. And we're going to do that by finding a tileable bitmap that is just a grunge map. So I've got one for you that I will allow you to download. Let's load it. Okay, if I view the image that I'm loading here, it's just this. It's not entirely black and white. It has a little bit of hue to it, but that's okay. It will be understood as black and white values, and it will add some glossiness. This doesn't really look like the finish of a wood, but it does break up our reflection just enough. Let's make sure that we set this to 1 and 1 as well. And you can see now the difference that makes. If we turn this off entirely and toggle it back on and off. So on looks like that, off looks like that. Okay, so that makes it look like a way more matte material because now the values of how glossy the reflection is being determined by this map, which is just a regular tileable glossy map from the internet. So what we want to do with that is basically turn down its influence, and this is basically like a percentage. So now 20% of the reflection glossiness is coming from this map, and the other 80% is coming from just our solid number up here. So when we turn down the influence of that map, we now have, and I want it to be a little tighter, so what we should do is set the number to 1, okay, and then turn up our map up and down if we want to make it more or less glossy. So that adds variation so that it's not a clean reflection, and those kind of details add a lot to your scene. Because if you look at a reflection usually in the real world, there really isn't going to be such thing as a perfect mirror reflection basically ever. So keep that in mind. Now a couple other things that I want to do here is add V-Ray dirt. So I talked about how it's a little darker in the edges. So what we can do is go in to the reflection here. We're going to make it so it reflects a little less as it gets into the edges. And then we'll go back into the diffuse of our underlying layer and make it so that it's a little darker in the edges. So for reflect here, let's just click on the map slot, go to V-Ray dirt. Click on it, hit OK. Now what this is going to do is make it so that, I actually like the way that looks. What this is going to do is make it so that where these edges meet in these little corners here, it can have a different color applied than out in the main field of the material. And it will search 10 inches out from there, basically make a gradient 10 inches out from there where these intersections happen, and apply this occluded color, like an ambient occlusion map. So the occluded color is going to be black, and for the included color, so the field reflection, we want this one. So we're basically putting the same reflection, but making it as it gets close to these edges, it will kind of fall off until it gets to the edges where there won't be any reflection. So that's the unoccluded color is our main reflection. As it gets to the edges in these occluded parts, it's going to be a black reflection. I actually think that we can turn this reflection up a little bit. Maybe more like that. That's looking pretty good. And we could maybe sharpen it with make it a little more glossy. But that's what the V-Ray dirt map does. There's not much else to it. You can go in and fidget with these settings a lot. I have other videos that are specifically about this, but what it's doing right now is just making it so the basic corners have less reflection in them. Now we can take, in our original material, our base material, which I'm going to change the name of, console wood 1. And in here, we can click on this bitmap here, and then up where it says bitmap, we can click on V-Ray dirt, and then keep the old as a submap. By default, it will put it in the unoccluded color, which is what we want in this map down here. So that remains our main texture, but at the edges, it's going to overlay a black on top of it in the occluded parts. So we're going to change the radius of that to 4 inches and just make it so where there's intersections in here, it just gets slightly darker up in the corners, just like an ambient occlusion map. And that's in the diffuse map of our underlying layer. So that's a pretty good layer, or a pretty good texture. What I had created for the rendering looks like this. They're basically the same. Okay, maybe slightly different. I said I was going to go in here and change the glossiness slightly, make it just a little bit more glossy. Of course, the way we do that is just by going into the overlay layer and adjusting that glossiness map to be a little bit less, like 20. Yes, I like it. One thing we could do in here too is adjust the Fresnel a little bit. So it's on by default. It's also locked at 1.6. Turn that off. Put it to 2.2. There we go. Now we have a nice wood texture. Now the last thing you can do, actually let's keep that open. The last thing we can do is adjust this color right here, which is telling it how much to blend with that. So if I put this to 1, or near solid white I should say, then it's basically just showing this overlay material entirely, and the wood underneath is completely lost. If I do the opposite, then the sheen on top will be lost. So I think maybe right about there. Let's see. Yes, I think in this case we're just in danger of losing the underlying grain of the wood, which we don't want to do. It's right about there. Now you can also put a map in here, which would make it so that the gloss is only in certain parts and it's not glossy in other parts. One thing you could do that would be cool is take this reflection map and place it right here. You'll see what that does. So now the sheen is only on the parts where these deep grains are, then that reflection, that sheen isn't happening. But it's also not happening full here because it's gray, not white. So it's not really giving me the effect I want, but that you can see the power of this V-Ray blend material and all the things you can do. So we're going to take that off, make it a nice clean finish like that. And we're going to go with that. And then all that's left to do is take this original material we have, take this new one, name it dark wood, and take this and drag it into slot 1, instance it, that's fine. You can see it applied to our console, but we need to go into our base material, into our diffuse map, well, into our V-Ray dirt, and then into our unoccluded color, and make sure it's being shown. Okay, and there it is. It's all applied. It's mapped just like our other map was. So it's working well. And the results will be similar to what I showed you at the beginning of this lecture. It should look something like this, which I think is pretty great. So there's the basics of applying our texture. The only thing left to do would be adjust it so that now it can do the, remember we did the verticals as well. So that's material ID number 2 in this material. We go all the way back up. So this one, if we take this, copy it, paste it, and then adjust it so that everything in this base material here is 90 degrees. Adjust 90. Make sure it's showing. And then of course we need to make sure the other maps are doing the same. Basically exactly the same material except everything rotated 90. With the material above, we don't really have to rotate it 90 because it's not direction specific. All it is a solid material with a tileable glossiness map in it. I do want to show you what that glossiness map looks like applied. So if we go in here, and go into our glossiness map, that's what the glossiness map looks like. So that's what it looks like mapped onto there. Let's go back to the wood though. And then the final thing I want to do is go into the slate editor, grab this material, and take a look at it in here. So it's this material here. You can see there's these two materials are the same, this one and this one, except for the rotated maps. Okay, so let's just examine one of them. You can see that it's just laying it out in nodes. The V-Ray blend node is here, and then it splits into the top material and the underlying material. The diffuse goes into a V-Ray dirt, and then just a regular map. The reflect goes to a regular map. The bump goes to a regular map, and so on. So when you break it down like that, it's not too complicated. That is the map of what the material should look like. And you can take this as far as you want to go. You can continue to add more layers of detail. You can add a glossiness reflection map that is very specific to what you want for both materials. You can continue to tweak settings, but really it's going to be all about having really good maps here. I think our settings are okay for this. Having really good maps and adding more maps and even painting custom maps for this material is what would really, really make it stand out. So that's the basics of how to lay out an advanced material, a very nice wood material that I think looks great on our console or buffet in our dining room.